Center myself. Hey there, folks, and welcome back into the Northern Futbol Podcast, episode 227 of Northern Futbol. Ben Steiner alongside Alex Gongier-Ruzik as Brendan gets ready to take a trip down to Florida. We're all going down to Florida. The Whitecaps, of course, taking on Miami in the second leg of the Concacaf Champions Cup. And that's our major storyline on the show today. The Whitecaps beating Miami 2-0 in that first leg. But Alex, how you doing? It's been a big week for the Whitecaps and all of Canadian soccer as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a great week to be out at a sold-out BC Place. Definitely just wild energy in terms of the lead-up, the build-up, the game itself, how it ended, a strong wave of support for the Whitecaps, a lot of chatter about the Whitecaps and around town. Just, people who have no interest in soccer, all of a sudden it's on everyone's lips. It's quite something. But then, the soccer world never stops. It was quite fun from my perspective. On Saturday, I get thrust right into a Salish Sea derby in the CPL. And then the next day I'm out at Swangard for the first NSL game at Swangard. Just the grass was smelling nice as it always is. The sun was peeking out. You can use all the beautiful adjectives to describe that place. No better place to be, except for the Rise, because they didn't have the greatest of games against the Montreal Roses. We'll break that all down. We have some questions on that. So yeah, it was fun to dive back into that. But yes, this Champions Cup run is obviously a huge deal, and it's cool to dive right back in with this leg too, and what could be a historic performance for both teams, right? If Miami finds their way back in it, what a story that is. But if the Whitecaps get the job done, history for them. So definitely a tasty one.
Yeah, I mean, we'll look back at that first game as well, and the Whitecaps really dominated. They didn't hold much of the ball, but they were able to adapt to how Miami was going to play. Miami was going to hold on to a lot of the ball, and I know that you spoke ahead of the game that these were two teams that wanted a lot of possession. The Whitecaps were able to adapt, hit on the counter. We saw Ali Ahmed have some space to run. We saw Pedro Vite with another exceptional performance as well. Of course, he scores 2 goals on the weekend against Minnesota United. The Whitecaps keep rolling in MLS. But the player that I want to focus on, and I think the player in the best form for the Whitecaps right now that's not named Brian White, is probably Sebastian Berhalter. The ability to win balls in midfield, the ability to transition, and he's got a heck of a long shot as well.
Yeah, absolutely. He was brilliant in leg one. I mean, he was the player of the match. I think that was pretty deserved. I agreed with CONCACAF's choice on that. I think I had him as well in my post-game piece.
Superior player of the game.
Yeah, he had wasn't it like, Michelob Ultra. He gets no beer for him, but he gets that fancy looking trophy that's like kind of massive for like a Champions Cup MVP award. But I digress. But I think for the Whitecaps, the big story for me in that leg one was individual performances. You mentioned it, and execution. Funnily enough, in terms of a team game, the Whitecaps didn't play that great. Certainly, Jesper Sorensen was not very happy actually after the game in terms of his team's performance. He was, of course, happy they won the way they did, but he wasn't happy with how they held the ball. It's interesting when you watch back the match. At halftime, he didn't like it. He subs off Daniel Rios, tries to bring in Emmanuel Sabi. That didn't work. Right away, he tried to put Pedro Vite up as a winger, trying to get more control. That didn't work. He finally gave up in like the 75th minute. He's all right, let's get Jaden Nelson out there. Let's stretch the field out. But for 75 minutes, Sorensen was doing his darn best to get the control that the Whitecaps seek in games, and they just wasn't there for them. But what's nice is much like Pumas in the last round, where again, that leg 2 performance overall wasn't one of their greatest, yet they got the job done. They executed where they needed to. And for me, that's the most remarkable part, and something I asked Brian White about in the lead up to the game and after. When you see this Whitecaps team, for all the work Sorensen has done and, with the tactical plan, everything that he's brought, this team is just so mentally strong. And you saw it in this game. Big crowd, big occasion, big superstars on their team. No worries. Like, they had 2 great chances. They scored. And most importantly, they kept a clean sheet, and they just seemed to rise to every moment that was asked of them.
Yeah, and that big crowd as well. I mean, both of us were in the press box covering the game for One Soccer and Sports Illustrated. But after Berhalter scored, I just kind of sat back and took it in that this was a crowd that was cheering for the Vancouver Whitecaps. They weren't necessarily there cheering for MESSI. Of course, many showed up for MESSI and the superstars on Inter Miami. But there were a number of people that were wearing Miami kits, MESSI kits, Argentina kits, that were booing MESSI whenever he was on the ball. The atmosphere was 54,000 for the Vancouver Whitecaps, and that's not something that I think Vancouver has seen in a long time outside of the Vancouver Canucks. Like a sporting atmosphere like that, I think really helped elevate the Whitecaps out of that sort of niche soccer conversation that we talk about so often in Canada to being that main entertainment option. And they delivered in front of that big crowd as well, because you remember the 2017 MLS Cup playoffs, all the push was to get people out to the stadium, and the Whitecaps put in a 0-0 draw. Not the worst result playoff wise. They go down to Seattle and lose there as well, but it didn't allow the Whitecaps to sort of build up. Whereas this result, first of all, a lot of people had to buy tickets to games later in the season in order to get tickets to the Miami game in terms of a Champions Cup pack the Whitecaps had. But to be able to deliver against Miami, play confidently, even if it wasn't maybe the best performance that the Whitecaps could play, I don't think anybody that went to that game is disappointed, because you saw flashes of what Lionel Messi has brought throughout his career. You saw a strong Whitecaps performance, a Whitecaps win, and the crowd was on the home side.
Yeah, but I think this is the story of this Whitecaps season. It's just they seem to rise to every occasion, and there's almost this contagious enthusiasm about the way they play and the way they win. Really, other than losing to Saprissa in game one, way back in February, you kind of got, they lose 2-1 after leading 1-0. They didn't let that build. Of course, they went and destroyed Portland a few days later to get that out of their minds. And then Chicago Fire, and even in that game, they were severely short-handed, and just, that seems to be the only game where someone's truly got their number. This Whitecaps team takes care of their business efficiently and ruthlessly. And I think what we also saw in terms of this crowd is like they got swept up in it all. Like you mentioned, a lot were there. Maybe that's it. It's hard to say they were there for the stars. I think they were there because of the stars, but I think what was clear is they realized this was a continental semifinal. But I think what could have happened is, had the Whitecaps put in a poor, flat performance, it could have just led to a very blasé, very mid crowd who are, you got to see Messi, maybe he scores a goal, you go home content, right? You get to see a living legend. But what happened was how the Whitecaps capitalized on the moments, gave them 2 goals to cheer about. For me, I just think of over the last few years, I've been to many a time where the stadium's been full, not to that extent, but I think LAFC, they got 31,000. They opened the upper deck. I think of some of these other games where they've had the chance to open the upper deck. How many times have you gone home from that game? The Whitecaps lost 1-0, or they drew 0-0, or they drew 1-1. And it was just this sentiment of the Whitecaps played well often in those games, but they just didn't execute. They didn't give the crowd something to cheer about. I just love in this moment, they capitalized on the fact there's a big crowd. They gave them something to cheer about, so that, yes, there was a genuine buzz leaving the stadium after that day of people like, wow, like this Whitecaps team, I haven't heard much of them this year, but like that was incredible. They dominated, etc. And I was thinking, that's a credit to this team. They seem to rise to the occasion, which has historically always been a problem for Whitecaps in games where they've had the chance to showcase themselves to a wider audience.
That BC Place Stadium comes under a lot of judgment through basically every week, but when that's full, it can really pop and be one of the best stadiums in Canada, maybe the best stadium that Canada has to offer. And of course, it's hosting a number of World Cup games, including the majority of Canada's World Cup games at the World Cup next summer. But we look ahead to the second leg, Whitecaps visiting Chase Stadium on Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Time kickoff. Can they get it done in the second leg? They kept the clean sheet in that first leg. They're confident. They rotated on the weekend. Miami rotated as well and looked terrible, giving up a 3-1 lead in the second half against Dallas. They lost 4-3, but none of the superstars were playing. I don't know how much you can really look into that game other than the fact the Whitecaps did the same thing and came away with 3 points. But can the Whitecaps get this done in the second leg?
Yeah, you have to think so. I think what's huge for the Whitecaps, and I think the thing that got lost in all the results is the 2 goals were fantastic because, man, against Monterrey, they left goals on the table in that 1-1 draw. Against Pumas, again, 1-1 draw. It felt like they had more to give. This time they got 2 goals. Great, but the clean sheet. Against Monterrey, they gave up a cheap goal, or Ocampo fell asleep. It was could have played him on. He played him on, scores. I think it was De La Rosa in that game. And then against Pumas, again, cheap set piece when they were winning 1-0. For me, the away goal is huge because both times they had to go down to Mexico and needed a goal. Now they don't need a goal. A 0-0 gets them through. A 1-0 loss gets them through. All of a sudden now, if they can score, which again, they've done a great job of scoring. They just, Minnesota, one of the best defenses in the league, tore them apart. Austin, one of the best defenses in the league, tore them apart. As we know, as we said leading into this game, this Miami defense isn't great. You fancy that they can go and score. If they do, that's a 4-goal swing Miami needs to produce. Of course, the looming factor is it's Lionel Messi, it's Luis Suarez, it's guys who can produce the moments of magic required. But I think ultimately the Whitecaps have put themselves in a situation of such control for as good as they've been this year. Like, it's going to take something catastrophic, and I think it's going to be fascinating to see what they put out, because I think they know they're in control of this, and I think their performance is going to probably reflect it.
And of course, they were able to get some of those big moments in second legs when they visited Liga MX teams in the last couple of rounds. They got the job done in the second leg at home against Saprissa as well. Does that experience of delivering in second legs really pay off for the Whitecaps, or is Chase Stadium just maybe not that same sort of atmosphere that they have to tame?
I think that's a huge point, because in each of those games they faced adversity, right? Saprissa, they needed to score at home and get the win. They did. Comfortable game in the end, but hey, Saprissa had some chances where they almost got away goals, made things interesting. That was adversity. Monterrey was a great one. The Whitecaps went down early in that game, and that game was played in a desert. The weather conditions were really rough. You know, they had to deal with the Sergio Ramos penalty late on that made things more interesting than it should have. Yet they came out of it. Pumas was the best example. They literally went down. They were minutes away from being out of this competition altogether. And then boom, last minute goal to rescue things. All that's huge, because those were all moments where they faced adversity. They faced, being down, being counted out. And I think this Whitecaps team, as we've learned, they're at their best when they're in control, when they're on the front foot, when they're initiating. And now, like I mentioned, since they are in control of this tie, it's up to them to dictate it. I think that's going to help them. And they do know that if things get dicey, if Messi pulls out a free kick magic, all of a sudden it's a 1-goal swing, 2-1 on aggregate. I don't think they're going to be worried, because they dealt with that against Pumas and Monterrey. And I think those experiences will be very valuable.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Miami as well, it's just twice in the last 17 games that they've played that they've been able to score 4 goals. So if the Whitecaps can get 1, they can be sitting pretty confident that Miami's not going to get 4. Those came against the New England Revolution and the Houston Dynamo, 2 teams that I don't think anybody would say necessarily measure up to what the Whitecaps can offer at both ends of the pitch. But when I look at this Miami team, especially on the weekend, when they rotated, but also showed some new faces that can make an impact that maybe haven't gotten the chance when their superstars eat up a lot of minutes. There's, a pressure for the likes of Luis Suarez and Sergio Busquets and Lionel Messi and Jordi Alba to play whenever they want to play. They're not going to sit if they feel that they're ready to go. They all sit on the weekend. Oscar Ustari sits, the goalkeeper as well. But they still managed to play well, at least for about 50 minutes before things really started to collapse against Dallas. And a few of the players that stood out to me, Alan Obando, he was on the Whitecaps discovery list. The Whitecaps know what he can offer. The Whitecaps made a trade with Miami to get some gammon for his discovery rights. And he's joined Miami, 18 years old, a Colombian guy. And he could offer something more in attack than Luis Suarez alongside Lionel Messi in a potential 4-4-2, which could offer a little bit more of a threat against the Whitecaps as well. We also saw some good performances from Ian Frey and Yannick Bright. Frey becoming quickly a fan favorite, not necessarily getting many minutes with Inter Miami. I've watched every Miami game this year. He was definitely more active in a fullback position, but I do think that if you play him and Jordi Alba and you have both going up, you leave very open spaces for the Whitecaps to get 1 goal. And if they get 1 goal, then it's effectively done for Miami. But does Miami have enough in the tank to make a comeback in this game? Like we've spoken about the brilliance of Lionel Messi, but could some of these other players potentially step up?
Yeah, well, I think if I'm Miami, and again, this is a big if, because I don't know if they will be willing, because this is going to involve some tough conversations. But for them to beat this version of the Vancouver Whitecaps, first and foremost, they're going to need more mobility on the pitch, like 100%. I think that was very clear in leg 1, that between Lionel Messi and Luis Suarez up front, there just wasn't enough in behind threat. You saw even just like Suarez wasn't able to move as well as he should have. It was very comfortable for Veselinovic and Blackman. Messi was sort of forced to pick up some of that slack. We were saying Messi make runs in behind, something he doesn't necessarily do as much for Miami, where he's usually dropping a little deeper. And then, I think at the other end, Miami were pretty good defensively. I think they found a good formula in that leg 1. And I think overall, they were just kind of overwhelmed by 2 moments. But for Miami, they need more mobility in the attack. So I'm very curious to see what they can do. I personally thought it was ridiculous that Fafa Pico didn't start, let alone see the field, against Vancouver, for whatever reason, you could talk about familiarity with this team, familiarity with that pitch, his speed. There's every reason that he could have ignited that game. But really, I think for Mascherano, it's going to come down to a hard call, because already if you're having Suarez and Messi on the field together, that lack of mobility is going to be something to watch. What did they do? Because what they put out in Vancouver, look, it was great for one thing. It was controlling the ball. They held 69% of possession. Nice. That's that. As you told me after the game with a big smirk on your face, Ben. But other than that, there was just not enough. They had 0.7 XG. Like, for a team with the players they have, for how good Vancouver's defense has been all year, that's not good enough. So I'll look for them to, if you can get some youngsters like Frey, Obando, maybe, throw in a Pico for some speed, maybe look at some other options. They have to do it, because I just thought they were too slow and they didn't look up to the pace in Leg 1.
Yeah, I do think that the three changes that you might see from that first leg, I don't think Federico Redondo necessarily gets many minutes. He didn't start in that first game, but I do think that a midfield pivot of Yannick Bright and Sergio Busquets, with Bright allowed to take a little bit more leeway attacking-wise, and Busquets maybe playing back because he can be so good at those threaded long balls. And then I do think you'll see Fafa Pico to open up the game a little bit more. Whichever fullback he goes up against, it's Messi on one side and Pico on the other. And I think Pico is probably going to win that matchup, while Messi, plays in a bit more of a free role as well. But then I do think maybe you see a shift between Messi and a free role as a winger and Pico as the left midfielder in a 4-4-2. And I think that the Messi and Obando connection hasn't been played before for Miami, outside of, I think, a couple minutes as a substitute, Obando, but he looked very good, very mobile, very quick in his first MLS start against Dallas. And I think that could be a little bit of a troubling attacker to defend for the Whitecaps when you consider the speed of Blackman and Veselinovic. They're not slow, but Obando offers something very different from what they would get from Luis Suarez.
Yeah, and I think, for example, if you're Miami, again, it's going to be a tough decision to make, but if you do a 4-2-3-1, kind of drop Messi in the hole as a 10 free roll, you throw Obando up front for some speed, you throw Pico on one of the wings. Obando and Pico both scored this weekend, so it's not an outrageous shout. And then, from there, you muck up the midfield. You have Busquets there, and you pair who you want with them. Bright, look, I thought Redondo was pretty good in Leg 1, other than the fact that he played with fire and maybe could have got a second yellow. Muck up that midfield, keep Weigand, who I thought was Miami's man of the match in Leg 1. There's some recipes there for Miami, but I think that the tough reality is for Mascherano is, in this one of these cases, you're going to have to make a tough call. And probably the biggest of all is what to do with Luis Suarez. Personally, I think 20 minutes of Luis Suarez off the bench might be what the doctor orders. Like, tired Whitecaps defending, who knows what the game will look like at that point. You're bringing on Suarez from the start, or from 20 minutes left. Great. Suarez from the start, though, he just seemed to never have the legs to get going. And it's hard to think that a weekend off is going to fix that problem, when it's clearly that he's dealing with physical discomfort versus fitness. And, with physical discomfort, you just never know how that's going to be with his knee issues.
Yeah, it is also 6 days rest for Luis Suarez. He often needs the full 7 days and the painkillers in his knees to be able to continue playing in MLS. And even still, he's not looked like the player that he was even last year, where he scored 20 goals and just missed out on the Golden Boot to Christian Benteke. But it will be a good game on Wednesday night. Certainly one to watch for any fans of Canadian soccer. I remember the vibes across the country when TFC and CF Montreal made their runs to the Champions Cup final, or I guess Champions League final at the time. And hopefully the Whitecaps and their fans can enjoy a similar aspect as well. Of course, that game on One Soccer on Wednesday. We'll be heading down for that. It should be nice weather in Fort Lauderdale. We've got a little NFP house coming together. Brendan making his way down from Toronto. But if you had to throw a prediction out for the second leg, what would it be? I'm going to go 2-1 Miami Whitecaps go through.
Yeah, you're loving really to throw the predictions out in this show. I think the Whitecaps will score, and I think Miami will score. I like your 2-1 prediction. I'll probably go something along the lines of 2-2. I think Miami, there's just enough firepower. They push, but in the Whitecaps, they get a goal, and once they get a goal, that kind of opens up the game, and they get a second. You saw it against Minnesota. I mean, we didn't really talk about it, but they just looked incredible in that second half, free-flowing stuff, tearing down just a very solid defense. So, especially if Miami takes some risks, and the Whitecaps, they saved a lot of guys for this match. feels like they could definitely get a goal or two. I mean, Dallas got 4, and that on its own is a statement of what Vancouver could do. Because I remember when Dallas played Vancouver, they did not have a lot of attacking juice.
Yeah, it'll certainly be a good game. And the Whitecaps looked confident against Minnesota United this weekend, especially in that second half. But we'll jump into our Canadians abroad section as well. Alistair Johnston is a 4-time Scottish Premier League champion as Celtic smashed Dundee United 5-0, with Johnson getting another assist on the season. He now has 8 trophies, with a 9th potentially loading as well. Dominance from Celtic and Alistair Johnston.
Yeah, no, it's very impressive to see. I mean, we've kind of spoken a lot about it, but I just love that, after a bit of a lull, he's ended the season with this run of assists. Because, now I think the big question for Johnston is, how much more does he have left to give at Celtic? You have to figure they get that 9th trophy. I think it's against Aberdeen in the Scottish Cup final, because I think Celtic had already won the League Cup earlier this year, on for another domestic treble. If they win that 9 trophies, he's won the league every year he's been there. He has 4 goals and 12 assists in all competitions this year. For a fullback, 16 goal contributions is always serious business. You just wonder if it's time, maybe, because especially with Celtic players, there's always a pipeline for them to make the jump up to top 5 leagues, especially the Premier League. For Johnson, what I'll be looking for is if this season is enough for that interest to really ramp up. And I think if a team comes and offers 10-15 million, I know Johnson signed a new contract so that he won't come cheap. I think for Johnson's sake, you have to think about it. The only consideration is World Cup next year. You have to be very careful about what move you make and where it goes, but it just feels like he's ready to take that next step. He's been at Celtic for 2.5 years now, and he's about won everything that you can win multiple times over. I think that next step might be ready.
And Air Jordan Heidema is back as well. She scored a great header in a 1-1 draw, the Seattle Reign against Bay FC. Good to see her back in form, scoring after considering all of the injuries that she had as well. 2 Canadian Portland Thorns also opened their account over the past week. First, Marie-Yasmin Aladou scored in a demolition of Gotham in midweek before Jessie Fleming scored a penalty in a 3-3 draw with Racing Louisville that also featured a beautiful Janine Sauna's assist. And after the match, Jessie Fleming not too pleased with the officiating either, pulling out a little bit of Marshawn Lynch as well, saying, I'm just here so I don't get fined. And what can I say that's going to get me fined? And making a bit of a dance around that. But she was very straightforward in critiquing the officiating in the NWSL on the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, just a carnage of a game, 3-3. I think Portland had equalized in like the 98th minute off a penalty as well. Just these Thorns, it's going to be fascinating to see how they do in the Champions Cup coming up, which is like slowly coming up, but it was a good reminder because they played Gotham in midweek, because of course Gotham is also in there to kind of get ahead of the weekend where they're going to be dealing with these responsibilities. Because Portland, I mean, they've been scoring a lot of goals lately. I think it was 4-1 over Gotham in the end, and now 3 against Louisville. But as we also saw defensively, it can be a bit open, chaotic there. And I think that's the challenge Rob Gillis had, is how do you find that balance between getting some of these goal scoring weapons going, especially now that they've got Aladou in to replace, someone like Sophia Wilson, who isn't with the team this year. But definitely they're finding the offensive balance. Let's see if they can get the defensive balance sorted, especially ahead of the Champions Cup. Because I'd honestly, they'd fancy their chances after how they destroyed Gotham in midweek.
And Adriana Leon also had an assist in a strong week for Canadians in the NWSL all around. A question from Dave DiCola. Any update on Evelyn Vien's injury status? She hasn't dressed for Roma since before the last international break, when, of course, she was taken out of Casey Stoney's squad just a few days after it was named.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have anything concrete, but we do know it's a hamstring issue. And as I've learned with hamstrings over the last few years, they're always tough. Even if you don't have surgery, sometimes it can be 4 to 6 weeks. Granted, we're pushing 4 weeks now, so I imagine we'll start to see an update. Of course, if she had surgery, then you're talking up to 3 months, 4 months. So I think the next few weeks we'll be telling. If we do see here start to train, start to appear, you can infer that, okay, it was maybe more of a strain and she didn't need surgery and she'll be back to action. But you do just hope that there wasn't anything major like that. And hopefully Roma are able to issue an update, because I wasn't able to find anything out there either. But it is a hamstring for those who maybe haven't seen that injury.
Northern Super League continuing as well with the full second week of matches. Ottawa Rapid beating AFC Toronto in their home opener 2-1. Kaylee Hunter gets the first goal in AFC Toronto history, 17-year-old. And Desiree Scott scores for the Ottawa Rapid, her first professional goal. Wasn't exactly maybe the prettiest goal, wasn't exactly a pure shot, but it certainly counted for Desiree Scott and the Ottawa Rapid, who had over 6,000 at their first game as well. Calgary Wild demolished the Halifax Tides 4-1 in Halifax's opener, and Halifax definitely looked out of sorts and playing their first game. Calgary, of course, with that one game under their belt in Vancouver the week before, a 1-0 loss to the Vancouver Rise. And the Montreal Roses beat the Vancouver Rise 3-1. Montreal 2-0 now, top of the table, 6 points. Alex, you were there at Swangard. What do you see from the Montreal Roses?
Yeah, well, I was lucky enough to make it out to Swangard, and certainly for those who are predicting the Montreal Roses to do great things this year, I know you certainly were high on them, and we'll see. It is a long season, but they look good. Don't pat yourself on the back yet. Football moves very quickly, as I've learned over the years, but they just looked great in both phases. Like offensively, they've got a good thing going. I genuinely think between Latifa Abdu and Tanya Boychuk, they might have two of the best forwards in the league, and they have them playing together and in sync. And what's nice is they've supported them super nicely. They've got a bunch of players around them who can run. In this game, Noemi Pequin was everywhere. She was playing wing, but at times she was making busting runs in her own box to stop tackles and then driving the ball forward. Of course, they've got the experience of someone like Charlotte Bilbao in the midfield. Someone that I know you'll like to hear did well was Megan Sauvé, the former U Sports standout. She was exceptional, just a creative piece. Seems to be a perfect connector to get the balls from the experienced midfielders up to the likes of Boychuk and Abdu. So they got a great thing going in attack. They're going to score a lot of goals this year. But defensively, they were no joke either. Behind the ball, they did a great job of just shutting down the middle. They made it very tough for the Rise to connect any passes up to their front line. A lot of the game was just kind of, for the Rise, was ball, build up, find Quinn, and Quinn either had to settle with trying to dribble 2 or 3 players because they would just be instantly swarmed by Rose shirts, or they would have to do something spectacular, which they did a few times. They honestly were probably the bright spot on Vancouver in that game, but the Roses did a good job of shutting down someone like Holly Ward, who is obviously so influential in Leg 1. So these Roses, they've got a good thing going on both sides of the ball, and they haven't even played at home yet. So definitely one to watch because they make their debut at home this weekend, which I know a lot of people in Montreal are quite excited about, especially given that the other football team in the city isn't doing too hot right now.
And a question from W Soccer CA. Would love to know your thoughts on the Rapid performance this weekend as well. She also asks about the Rose, but we broke down the Rose just there. It seems like a tremendous performance against the Vancouver Rise. Ottawa Rapid, of course, they do get 3 points in their home opener in what looked like a good crowd at least, and a fairly organized performance against a Toronto team that is still finding their footing.
Yeah, no, I think for Ottawa, it's encouraging that they were able to go out and get these 3 points right away. Granted, like you mentioned with Toronto, didn't seem like they were like in game 1, they weren't able to really show their best version of themselves. They're absolutely loaded with injuries. Just a lot of key players already out. We saw Amanda West had to get sent back to Houston. Now that's a huge blow, as I thought she could have been a very, very sneaky good loan. We haven't seen like a Maya Jones yet, who is someone I also highlighted on that team. But for Ottawa, they showed just good experience. It was a good organized performance. And then to get a Desiree Scott goal on a set piece, her first goal, I think, since 2010 it was, when she's with the Whitecaps. And like you mentioned, it was her first professional goal. The perfect recipe for a great weekend in Ottawa, and something to build on. But for Toronto, I would say definitely some early concerns abound. Granted, it's just 2 games, but with other injuries, it's going to be some tough sledding ahead, it feels.
And a question from Dave DeCola as well. Given the injury concerns up front and her performances as a substitute in the first few games, Kaylee Hunter deserves to start the next game for AFC Toronto. Is there any reason not to start her?
100%, because Ottawa obviously put in a good performance, and we're up 2-0 before Hunter scored late. And, Hunter, you just see her goal. That's what she did for the Whitecaps. She's electric, getting in behind, quick. But she's also, finished with both feet, has that eye for goal, and I just love the way she took that chance. So absolutely, if you're Toronto, I think that's something to look at, because especially in that first game against Montreal, they kind of lacked that creativity in the final action. I thought Emma Reagan had some good moments in terms of that, and we know what Emma Reagan can bring, but ultimately, the big success for Montreal right now is that they're getting Abdu and Boychuk chances. By the way, if you haven't seen Latifa Abdu's goal from this weekend. She scored an absolute rocket at Swangard that stunned the crowd. For Toronto, I think having someone like Kaylee Hunter on the field, she can be that sort of impact player if you can get her the service. And I think Toronto has the players to get the service. But yeah, with all the injuries of West, I know Kovacevic was injured. We haven't seen Jones yet. Then may as well give Hunter a run. And the fact that she's already got a goal under her belt shows why that should be the case.
And we'll jump into the Canadian men's national team as well. A question from Ryan Foxworthy. Do you know the plan of BC Place during the World Cup? Are they just putting a grass surface over the top of the turf or something else? And it will be a little bit more of an intense process to get grass in at BC Place. They're not taking up the turf, but they are, actually growing grass that's fully rooted in BC Place. Rather than just laying sod over as they did for the Wrexham game last year. And they will have the grass in very soon as well for the World Cup because they're installing it for the Gold Cup. And the plan from last I heard is that they're going to keep it, but it will be a much more structured and safe grass to play on than I think we saw at some of the Copa America games, depending on the venue, as well as what we saw, especially at BC Place for the Wrexham game. As much as that was an okay surface, it seemed.
Yeah, well, I mean, the goal is to, like you mentioned, the goal is to have it in already. It's obviously, taking some time logistically to deal with all that. As we know, sometimes that things can move slowly in that department. But like you mentioned, the Gold Cup is the plan. And yeah, they're not going to just do it Gold Cup, tear it up and bring back for the World Cup. They want it to be solid. They want the Whitecaps to use it so it can be tested. I imagine they'll want friendlies as well, just to have the highest quality grass possible over the next 12 to 18 months. So yeah, like you mentioned, the plan is to lay it over the turf. Like, they're not going to rip up the turf completely, but at the same time, it's not going to just be rolling out straight grass like that's patchy and soft. There's going to be an installation process that I imagine, maybe they lay down some boards across the turf and then properly put, the layers of soil, all the under stuff that you need to properly let it grow. So I'm going to be fascinated to see how that plan all comes together, but I know it's something that they've been working on very diligently over the last 12 months to get right, and hopefully they can have it in place and as pristine as possible for that banner match against Honduras at the Gold Cup.
Certainly a little bit less of an exciting opponent, but when are we renaming the podcast from Northern Futbol to Northern Horticulture Podcast? Because it seems like at least we have a baseline knowledge in how grass grows. I don't know, maybe slightly like grade 3 science class paying off here. But another question from Matt Ryerchuk. What would be the process required for Owen Goodman to obtain a Canadian passport? He has already expressed interest in representing the Canadian men's national team. Is he a goalie that Jesse Marsh would consider if he gets another loan to either League One or the Championship after his current loan?
Yeah, hopefully it's a process he's, began, because we know it's possible. Someone like Ike Ugbo is a very similar situation because Goodman was born in the UK, lived here, during formative years, and then went back to the UK. We know Ugbo did something similar. He was able to make the switch and eventually represent Canada. So hopefully, Goodman, gets that all taken care of and certified. Of course, this is one of the moments where there's intersection between politics and football. There could be a whole administration change this week with the elections, hopefully, and whatnot. From a footballing perspective, no matter what happens, that doesn't affect Goodman's ability to get the passport because he's eligible from a FIFA standpoint. It just sounds like, based on what he said and whatnot, that's the lone hurdle. Because I think he's a very high potential goalkeeper that Jesse Marsh will be interested in. He's had a very good year at League Two with Wimbledon, saved a lot of goals above expected, really grown. From what, if you're asking a lot of or reading a lot of stuff from people who follow Wimbledon and follow Palace, they say he looks a lot more mature, a lot more like a leader. And I like what Matt says here about potentially making a move upward. Given that he's only, I think, 20, it would make a lot of sense for him to maybe go to the Championship or maybe go to League One, like we've seen a lot of young goalkeepers do. I know Palace are very high on this future. They've been monitoring him closely while he's been on loan. So I think for Jesse Marsh, he'll be following along closely, and hopefully he'll be pushing maybe to get that passport sorted.
And the Canadian Premier League also continuing on with the fourth match day. Valor losing 1-0 to the HFX Wanderers. Atletico Ottawa putting up a 3-1 win against Calvary, the first Salish Sea derby of the season, which will also be a matchup in the Canadian Championship, ending 1-1 at Willoughby Community Park. And the first 905 derby of the season, York Forge 2-2 as well. But from Matt Ryerchuk again, pick 2 U21 players from each team to watch out for this season based on potential or being good prospects.
Yeah, I love the question as always, and I love it because there's a good crop of U21s this year. Early days, but like Ottawa, every year they've been fighting to get their U21 minutes. They have 974 already, and it's week 4. They're already almost halfway to the total. So not only are they top of the table in points, but they're near the top of the table in U21s. There's a lot of exciting ones. So quickly to roll through a few that have stood out and that I think will stand out. I mean, with Pacific, they got a few to pick for. I think Max Anchor is one to watch in terms of a goalkeeper on loan from the Whitecaps. He's, been pretty good in his performances. He got dropped this weekend just to bring in the experience of Sean Melvin, but I think it's going to be not long before Anchor wins that spot back. Otherwise, you can take your pick between Sammy Keshevars, Christian Greco-Taylor. I'll highlight Keshevars just because as a young midfielder, he's come through the Pacific system. He really impressed last year. Great energy and good technical ability. So I really liked his development. Over at Vancouver, Tierno Elijah Ba, he's really stepped up this year. He's shown that he can play a bit as a winger. He's been really good in the last few weeks as a fullback. He's great motor, can get up the field. He's 5'7", and almost in a depreciating way, he'll always joke that he's 5'7", but he doesn't play like he's 5'7". So I really like just his all-around ability. Very good on the ball too. And then there's a lot of ones that stood out, but I think Emmerich Fotzing appears to be a real gem for Vancouver. He's big, physical, already able to handle the level, but he's got technical ability for days. When he was signed, someone had told me that, watch out, this is another kind of like Gritty McDonald. And I laughed because I'm like, okay, you had one McDonald, surely not. Okay, I see the potential. He has very similar qualities technically, and he's got physical attributes that will help him. So keep an eye on Fotzing. Rolling through with Cavalry, Mile Henry, still U21. I think this could be a big year if he can just stay healthy because, man, he can be incredible when he's been fit and on the pitch. Otherwise, lots of good options there. I'll highlight Nico Myroniak. I love his background just because he's a futsal player as well, and you see it, incredible close control, can dribble in these tight spaces, make things happen. He's played a bit as out wide in midfield, a bit of a versatile player. I like that. Rolling through at Valley, they've got a bit of a smaller class, but Miles Morgan, the former Whitecaps FC2 and the Canada U20 standout, he can be dangerous around goal. I know Eric Pop, we haven't seen him yet, but very highly rated as well from his time, I think in League One, Ontario, if I'm not mistaken. He had a stint there. He is one to watch. Over at Forge, Kadeen Kane looks to have leveled up this year, which is, he's already got a lot of potential. He's a big guy, which always helps, but he's very technically sound as a midfielder, but he's kind of shown that maybe a right back, center back could be in his future. Of course, for Canada, when you hear those things, your eyes light up because you can never have too many center backs, as we've learned. Otherwise, someone like Amadou Kone coming off the bench, he's just got really good feet, really good technical skill, and that's always nice to have as a wide player. Just a couple teams here rolling through. I mean, I'll let Ben chime in with anyone else that I might have missed or any thoughts. But of course, if you go over to York, Shola Jimo, enough said. We've talked about him on the podcast. Hopefully he gets a look at the Gold Cup. But otherwise, even Pavella in goal had a couple of decent games from the start. And maybe Alexander Bergman, a young center back as well, got his first minutes for against Forge this past weekend. So keep an eye on him. Over at Ottawa, they've got the whole lot. Right now, it's the Noah Batne, Gabriel Antnoro, Loic Kluche, Sergei Kozlovsky quartet. Of those four to highlight two, I'd go with Batne just for reasons. It feels like there's a future Canadian national team center back there. So good on the ball. But Kozlovsky, kid is 16, and he's already out there playing center back, winding up opponents, making big slide tackles, passing the ball. He feels like a very good, exceptional talent. So Kozlovsky, I know in Montreal, they raved about him, and it was a big loss for CF Montreal that he decided to leave and go to the CPL. Ottawa may have picked up a gem. And lastly, that leaves Halifax. I think Adam Perlman, he's really stepped up the TFC loanee right away, slotted in Patrice Geyser's improved defense. Otherwise, I think one I really liked is Thiago Coimbra. He's just got such a big body for a striker, but he moves well, and you can start to see that he's reading the game differently than before. He's had a great assist already, a great goal, and there seems to be signs that he's starting to click, and he's healthy. That's also been a very big issue for him, availability. So a bit of a long-winded one, but I know that's the kind of that's a throwback question on Northern Futbol, and hopefully that gives you an idea of some of the U21s to watch.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty well covered it all off there. And of course, are watching every single CPL game. Well, I keep my eyes on as much of the 15 MLS games each week as I can. But Kozlovsky's impressed me this year as well. I mean, just being 16 and being able to rile up opponents, being able to play center back. I've been blown away by some of the 20-year-old center backs in MLS that a 16-year-old playing center back. You can only imagine, the development that he's going to have over the next 4 years as well. But we will jump into some of those MLS questions as well. We already touched on the Whitecaps, of course, but the struggles continued for Toronto FC and CF Montreal, who fell even further down the MLS table, but still aren't last. That honor goes to the reigning MLS Cup champion LA Galaxy, who lost again this weekend to the Portland Timbers. TFC fell to NYCFC 1-0. Montreal fell 1-0 to the Red Bulls. Bad weekend for Canadians facing New York teams. Montreal is now winless in 10 games to start the season. Toronto FC, of course, with that one win under their belt, but both teams definitely struggling. CF Montreal only on 3 points, tied with LA for the bottom. A question from Matt Ryerchuk, though, is Luca Petrasso making a case for the third left back spot after Adekubi, or is it still Basong's spot? Basong did score for SKC on the weekend.
Yeah, it's a good question because for as negative as things have been in Montreal, the one, I guess, two bright lights is that they're defending very well under Marco Donadel. On the flip side, they're not scoring a lot of goals, but they're defending well, right? It's a lot of 0-0s, 1-0s, and that's good because they've got Canadians like Petrasso. Of course, we know Waterman playing a big role. Sirois, Breza got the start this weekend as Montreal prepares for a big match in midweek, and Petrasso has been one of them. He kind of was struggling. It was a bit mixed bag to start the year. Let's just center Laurent Courtois was asking him to play as a left center back, but since Donadel has slotted him out at left back, we're seeing a bit more of the Petrasso. We know from at least when he was at Orlando and TFC, like he's got a good left foot. He's a solid defender. So definitely one to keep an eye on because as mentioned, like if Sam Adekubi and Alphonso Davies, the fitness is going to be an issue. You're going to need left back cover. And I think Petrasso, given his age, his profile, he's absolutely in that mix. I mean, you can't forget a Raheem Edwards, although his minutes have kind of been all over the map with the Red Bulls, and certainly Basong. But given that Basong's been playing a lot of midfield, if you're talking a natural left back, Petrasso is certainly increasing his stock. So maybe keep an eye for the Gold Cup if Canada is looking for a left back option.
The Canadian Championship also gets underway this week with the first round, and all eyes are on the Turtle Derby of Montreal versus Toronto, as well as another Salish Sea Derby as well. But Montreal-Toronto, who's this more important for? Because if they lose, season's effectively over. Neither of these teams are doing anything in MLS.
Yeah, and I think it's huge because of that. Like this is their chance for silverware, although, right now, who wants to go through the Vancouver Whitecaps, as you likely will have to get your hands on the trophy. But like this is a competition that means a lot for both teams. Like they're the two winningest teams. The Whitecaps still haven't yet caught up to either of them, despite their recent run of winning 3 in a row. And the fact is, because the Whitecaps have a three-peat, Montreal haven't won since 2021. 4 years. If they don't win this year, that extends to 5. That's not good enough for Toronto, who's won it the most times. They had 4 peats back in the day. They haven't won like a proper tournament since 2018. And, they won in 2020, but even that one, it doesn't quite feel the same. And they had to get through penalties and Forge to get there. Like for them, they really need this competition. So I would argue Toronto, just given their history and where they're at. And I think it's something with the fact that they've actually had some really improved performances in MLS play, that if they win this could kind of galvanize their season. Whereas I think with Montreal, it's it just feels like this won't change it as much, even if they win, because, as we saw when they lost to Forge last year, they might be prone to an upset elsewhere. But I think for TFC, like if they lose this, like it's going to be super demoralizing right when it seems like they're sort of turning a corner, at least in terms of some of their MLS results.
And in terms of the other matchups as well, of course, we do have the amateur teams in the competition. Atletico Ottawa taking on League One Ontario champions Scorsapi FC. Cavalry FC taking on Edmonton Scottish United. So Edmonton gets to see Cavalry again in a CPL squad, and Scottish United with a few connections to that old FC Edmonton team as well. Of course, we've got TFC versus CF Montreal, York United against FC Laval of Ligue 1 Quebec, Pacific FC versus Vancouver FC meeting again in the Canadian Championship after battling in the CPL just this past weekend. Forge taking on Halifax, and Valor against the TSS Rovers, who of course have been the darlings of this tournament for a number of years, but aren't quite the same team as they have been in past years. But when you take a look at the TSS Rovers, Edmonton Scottish, FC Laval, what do you see from these amateur sides this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big one is always matchup, right? You just want to catch teams at the right time. We saw that with Rovers and Valor a few years ago. You saw that last year with Saint Laurent, caught Halifax at a perfect time. So right now, what I'm looking at is probably Rovers and maybe Laval. I think for Scrisapi, it's tough. Ottawa look incredible. They're at home. They're playing well. This feels like when they're going to get a result. Scrisapi will be interested to see how they hold. Edmonton Scottish is tougher to say because Cavalry are in poor form. They always struggle in April, granted, but also Cavalry have they have a very good history in the first round. They seem to raise their level for these sorts of CanChamp games, so it's hard to fully bet against them. This is also Edmonton's debut in this competition. League One Alberta only launched last year. Some might point to the Rovers. The year they beat Valor was it's just their second year in League One, but granted, I think with Cavalry, it's a bit of a different beast. Laval York's an interesting one because York's been playing well, but they've also had some trouble holding on to leads. And they've also played a lot of guys hard minutes. So if they rotate, that always gives Laval a chance. And if they do play their guys, it's going to get some tired legs. So keep an eye on Laval. Some of the Quebec teams have always been good, but like for some reason, the Quebec teams almost always get drawn against Forge, which is never easy. Last year was one of the first years they weren't drawn against the Forge and you got an upset. Like there's a lot of talent in Quebec. Then lastly, the Rovers. This is a very turned over Rovers team. They've lost some of their key vets, but there's still a lot of returnees who've been in the CanChamp before, who've been there for upsets. They nearly beat Pacific last year, if not for a late goal. And Valor, as we know, have kind of struggled-ish to start the year. They had a good performance against Forge, a mixed performance against Halifax. So the Rovers, given their history, you do know they're going to go make it uncomfortable for Valor at least.
Yeah, it'll certainly be fun to see all the amateur sides in the competition. I guess semi-pro in the case of some of them. But that's all we've got for episode 227 of the Northern Futbol Podcast. For Brendan, Alex, I've been Ben. Thanks so much for tuning in. And it's certainly going to be a big week in Canadian soccer. So make sure to subscribe to Northern Futbol on whatever social platform you're on. And you can also get the podcast wherever you get your podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be back next time.